What happens when arrogance at 30,000 feet meets a secret that could ground an entire airline? On Aura Airlines Flight 88 from New York to London, a man in a $5,000 Tom Ford suit, Chad Covington, openly mocked a quiet black man flying in economy. He laughed at his simple clothes, sneered at his seat in the back, and called him a charity case. But Chad had no idea who he was talking to. He didn't know about the single discreet email being sent from seat 34B over the Atlantic. He was about to learn that the man he was ridiculing didn't just have a ticket on this plane. He held the fate of every single plane in the airline's fleet in the palm of his hand. This isn't just a story about disrespect. It's a story of devastating karma, where one cruel laugh triggered a professional and personal apocalypse. The Apollo Lounge at JFK's Terminal 4 was a symphony of curated exclusivity. The clinking of ice in crystal glasses, the soft murmur of conversations about market caps and mergers, the scent of expensive leather and freshly brewed espresso. It was an ecosystem designed to insulate its inhabitants from the chaos of public travel. Within this bubble sat Chad Covington, a man who didn't just exist in this world, but wore it like a second skin. His Tom Ford suit was impeccably tailored, his Patek Philippe watch a subtle but screamingly loud declaration of his 7-figure bonus, and his smirk was permanently affixed, a testament to his belief that he had not just arrived, but conquered. Across from him, his girlfriend, Tiffany, scrolled through Instagram, occasionally looking up to nod at whatever self-aggrandizing point Chad was making. "Honestly, Tiff," he said, gesturing with his flute of champagne, "the riffraff they let through security these days is astonishing. It's like the floodgates have opened." His gaze drifted across the lounge and settled on a man sitting alone near the large window overlooking the tarmac. The man was black, probably in his late 50s, dressed in a simple dark grey cashmere sweater, comfortable-looking trousers, and a pair of well-worn but clearly high-quality leather boots. He wasn't on his phone. He wasn't reading a financial newspaper. He was simply watching the ground crew service a massive Airbus A350, the very model they would soon be boarding for their flight to London Heathrow. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze, a look of profound concentration that seemed entirely out of place amidst the loud displays of importance surrounding him. "Look at that guy," Chad muttered, nudging Tiffany. "How did he even get in here? Must have a one-time pass from some credit card. Probably saved up for a year just to fly to London in the back of the bus." Tiffany glanced over, her expression a practiced blend of disinterest and disdain. "He doesn't really fit the vibe, does he?" "Vibe? He's killing it," Chad scoffed. "Probably going to ask the flight attendant for 3 bags of pretzels and a can of Coke. It's embarrassing." The man in question, Jonathan Paul, was oblivious to their commentary, or perhaps, more accurately, he was immune to it. He had spent a lifetime in rooms where he was underestimated, a ghost at the banquet, his presence tolerated, but not truly welcomed until his value was revealed, usually in the form of a signed check with an astonishing number of zeros. He wasn't just watching the A350, he was appreciating it. He knew the precise thrust of its Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engines, the tensile strength of its carbon fiber composite wings, and the astronomical cost of its recent financing, a cost he was intimately familiar with. The boarding call for Aura Airlines Flight 88 echoed through the lounge. "We now invite our first and business class passengers to begin boarding at Gate A7. Chad stood up, smoothing his suit. "That's us. Time to leave the commoners behind." He and Tiffany glided towards the gate, their roller bags making smooth, expensive clicks on the polished floor. Jonathan waited. He watched the priority lane fill with people who looked just like Chad, anxious to assert their status by boarding first. He waited until the announcement was made for economy class passengers, zones 4 and 5. Then he calmly picked up his single, understated leather duffel bag and walked towards the gate. As he presented his boarding pass, seat 34B, the gate agent gave him a polite, professional smile. Chad and Tiffany, who were just getting their passports checked at the priority lane, happened to look over. Chad's eyes widened in theatrical disbelief, and he let out a short, sharp laugh. "No way," he said loud enough for several people to hear. "The guy from the lounge. He's in the back. Zone 5. I knew it." He turned to Tiffany, his voice dripping with condescension. "See? All that quiet confidence was just nothing. Absolutely nothing." Jonathan heard him. It was impossible not to. He didn't turn his head. He didn't flinch. He simply accepted his boarding pass from the agent, gave her a small, respectful nod, and proceeded down the jet bridge. The cold, sterile tunnel felt like a transition between worlds. He was leaving the world of perception and entering the world of reality. And in his world, the reality of seat 34B was far more powerful than the illusion of seat 3A. The game, he thought to himself, had just begun. The cabin of the Airbus A350 was a marvel of modern aviation, but its social geography was as old as time. At the front, the lie-flat beds of business class were cocoons of privilege, complete with amenity kits, noise-cancelling headphones, and flight attendants who addressed you by name. Further back, past the curtain, lay premium economy, a sort of purgatory for those with aspirations, but not quite the budget. And then there was economy, the great equalizer, a dense tapestry of humanity, where personal space was a forgotten luxury. Jonathan made his way down the aisle to row 34. He placed his duffel bag in the overhead compartment with an ease that spoke of frequent, no-fuss travel, and settled into his window seat, 34B. He preferred the window. It gave him a view of the wing, the engines, the physics of flight that had fascinated him since he was a boy, building model airplanes in his basement. A few minutes later, the last of the business-class passengers ambled past. Among them were Chad and Tiffany. They had deliberately waited to be the last of their section to board, another small power play to ensure they were seen. As they approached row 34, Chad spotted Jonathan. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. He stopped, blocking the aisle, creating a small traffic jam behind him. "Well, well, well," he drawled, his voice carrying easily in the pre-flight quiet. "Look who it is. Found your spot, did you? Hope the legroom is to your liking back here in steerage." Tiffany giggled, a high-pitched, unpleasant sound. Jonathan looked up from the window. His eyes, calm and deeply intelligent, met Chad's. He said nothing. This silence, this utter lack of reaction, seemed to infuriate Chad more than any retort could have. It was a denial of his power. "What's the matter?" Chad pressed, leaning over the passenger in the aisle seat. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you just overwhelmed by the luxury? I bet a seat like this is a big step up for you. Probably flew Spirit last time, huh?" A flight attendant named Sarah, a seasoned professional with a kind but no-nonsense demeanor, arrived to see what the hold-up was. "Sir, is there a problem? Could you please take your seat so we can prepare for departure?" Chad waved a dismissive hand at her. "No problem, sweetheart. Just saying hello to a friend from the lounge." He looked back down at Jonathan, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was intentionally loud enough for the entire section to hear. "I've got to hand it to you guys. Affirmative action is a hell of a thing. Gets you into the best airport lounges, even if you have to sit with the luggage on the flight." The passengers in the surrounding rows shifted uncomfortably. A few shot angry glances at Chad. The man in the aisle seat next to Jonathan looked mortified, but Jonathan's expression remained unchanged. It was a mask of serene neutrality, honed over decades of similar encounters. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, a smooth baritone with no trace of anger, only a faint, almost academic curiosity. "Are you finished?" The simple question threw Chad off. "What? I'm just making an observation." "It was a poor one," Jonathan said, his gaze unwavering. "Now, as the flight attendant requested, you're holding up the boarding process. Your seat is waiting for you." Stung by the public, calm dismissal, Chad's face flushed a deep red. He was used to being the one in control, the one who intimidated. Being so coolly handled by the very man he was trying to humiliate was a profound insult. "You've got a lot of nerve," Chad snarled, his voice losing its suave edge and becoming harsh. "Enjoy your complimentary peanuts." He finally straightened up and stormed towards the front of the plane, Tiffany trailing in his wake like a pilot fish. Sarah, the flight attendant, lingered for a moment. She looked at Jonathan, her eyes filled with a mixture of apology and concern. "Sir, I am so sorry about that," she said softly. Jonathan finally allowed a small, weary smile to touch his lips. He looked at her name tag. "It's quite all right, Sarah. You handled it professionally. Thank you. If there's anything at all you need—" "I'm fine," he assured her. "I'd just like to get to London." She nodded and continued with her duties, but the incident stuck with her. She had seen arrogance and entitlement before. It was an occupational hazard. But this was different. It was cruel, personal, and utterly unprovoked. And the target of it all, he seemed unshakable, like a mountain weathering a pointless storm. As the plane pushed back from the gate and the powerful engines began to spool up, Sarah couldn't help but feel that the man in the expensive suit had just made a very, very big mistake. The transatlantic flight settled into its familiar rhythm. The lights were dimmed, the drone of the engines became a constant, hypnotic hum, and the cabin became a collection of private worlds, illuminated by the blue glow of entertainment screens. In business class, Chad was holding court. He had already had 2 glasses of vintage Bollinger, and was loudly recounting his version of the encounter to Tiffany and an unfortunate businessman seated across the aisle who was trying desperately to read a prospectus. "You should have seen his face, Tiff. Utterly blank, like he couldn't even comprehend what I was saying," Chad boasted, his voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere. "These people are given so many handouts, they don't even recognize when they're in a place they don't belong. It's a societal problem, really." Tiffany, swirling her own champagne, nodded enthusiastically. "You were so direct, honey. It's what I love about you. You're not afraid to speak the truth." Sarah, the flight attendant, passed through the cabin collecting glasses. She overheard Chad's performance, and her lips tightened. She made a mental note of his name, Mr. Covington, Seat 3A. The airline had strict policies on passenger conduct, but Chad was being careful to stay just inside the line, his insults veiled as social commentary. Still, his behavior was poisoning the cabin's atmosphere. Meanwhile, back in seat 34B, Jonathan Paul was the picture of tranquility. He had declined the meal service, asking only for a bottle of still water. He didn't watch a movie or listen to music. For the first few hours, he simply looked out the window at the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean below and the impossible blanket of stars above. Then, about 3 hours into the flight, he opened his laptop. He paid for the premium Wi-Fi package, the one with the fastest available speed. The man in the aisle seat, a young software developer named Kevin, glanced over and saw the login screen for a secure encrypted network that he recognized as something used by high-level finance and government agencies. He'd assumed the quiet man next to him was a retired professor or something similar. The sight of the ultra-secure network piqued his curiosity. Jonathan typed with a quiet efficiency. He opened a single, minimalist email client. There was only one new message in his inbox. From James Harrison, CEO, Aura Airlines. Subject, final numbers, fleet expansion. Body, Jonathan. Attached are the final audited figures for the Q4 performance review. As you can see, margins are tight, but within the projected parameters. The board has formally approved the Series E financing proposal for the next phase of the A350 fleet acquisition. We are green-lit and ready to sign as soon as you give the final word. The entire deal hinges on Paul Capital's anchor investment. Let me know if you have any last thoughts. Hope you're well. Best James Jonathan read the email twice. He downloaded the attached multi-hundred-page financial report and scanned through the executive summary, his eyes moving with the speed of someone who could absorb and process complex data instantly. He wasn't just reading the numbers, he was seeing the story they told, of fuel costs, maintenance schedules, passenger load factors, and profit margins. It was the story of Aura Airlines. He then navigated to a new window, a direct messaging portal linked to his family office. He typed a short message to his chief of staff. Eleanor, please pull all available data on a tech sales executive named Chad Covington. Works for a mid-cap firm called Innovate Solutions. Also check our portfolio. Do we have any pending deals or interests associated with Innovate Solutions? I need the information before we land at LHR. Finally, he switched back to his email and began to type a reply to James Harrison, the CEO of the very airline he was currently flying on. The email was short, precise, and would have sent shockwaves through the financial world if anyone else had seen it. 2. James Harrison. Subject, final numbers, fleet expansion. Body, James. The numbers look solid. Paul Capital is prepared to execute the wire transfer for the initial tranche, $1.2 billion, within 24 hours of signing. We are fully committed. However, I am currently on board Flight 88, JFK to LHR, seated in economy. We need to have a serious conversation upon my arrival about the passenger experience and the culture being fostered on your aircraft. There are some inconsistencies that I find deeply troubling. I will be available to meet you at the airport. Regards, Jonathan Paul Chairman, Paul Capital. He hit send. The email, a multi-billion-dollar commitment and a stark warning, shot from the plane, across a satellite, and into a server in London. Jonathan closed his laptop. He leaned his head back against the seat, his work done. As he did, a baby, a few rows ahead, began to cry, a tired, distressed wail that cut through the cabin's hum. A wave of audible groans and sighs rippled through the nearby seats. Chad, from his business-class throne, was heard saying loudly, "Can they not shut that thing up? Some of us are trying to sleep." Jonathan, however, simply unbuckled his seatbelt. He walked a few rows forward to where a young, exhausted-looking mother was trying desperately to soothe her child. "Is everything all right?" he asked softly. The mother looked up, her eyes filled with tears of frustration. "I'm so sorry. He won't settle. I think his ears are hurting from the pressure." Jonathan gave her a gentle smile. "It happens. May I?" He gestured to the baby. Hesitantly, she nodded. Jonathan leaned in and began to speak to the child in a low, rhythmic hum, a soft, deep sound. He gently tapped a rhythm on the baby's back. Within a minute, the crying subsided into soft whimpers, and soon after, the baby's eyes fluttered closed. The mother stared at him, astonished and profoundly grateful. How did you do that?" "I have 4 grandchildren," Jonathan said with a warm smile. "You learn a few tricks. You get some rest now." He returned to his seat, unaware that Sarah, the flight attendant, had witnessed the entire exchange from the galley. She saw the condescension from the man in 3A and the quiet, unassuming kindness from the man in 34B, and she felt, with more certainty than ever, that a reckoning was coming. The first rays of dawn cracked across the horizon, painting the clouds in hues of orange and pink as Flight 88 began its descent into London. The spell of the overnight journey was broken as the cabin lights slowly brightened and the crew prepared for landing. Chad Covington awoke with a groan, stretching theatrically in his lie-flat bed. He had slept soundly, cushioned by champagne and his own sense of superiority. His first thought was of the man in economy. He chuckled to himself. He imagined the man, Jonathan, crammed in his seat, stiff and tired, a perfect symbol of his station in life. The thought filled Chad with a smug satisfaction. It was the natural order of things. The landing at Heathrow was impeccably smooth. As the massive aircraft taxied towards the terminal, the familiar chime sounded, and the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to London Heathrow, where the local time is 6:45 a.m. For your safety, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate, and the captain has turned off the fastened seatbelt sign. We thank you for flying with Aura Airlines." It was the standard arrival speech, but then it was followed by another, highly unusual announcement from the lead flight attendant. "Ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention for one moment, please? We have a special request. Would Mr. Jonathan Paul, seated in 34B, please remain in his seat after the aircraft has docked? A member of our ground staff will be coming aboard to escort you from the aircraft. Again, Mr. Jonathan Paul, please remain seated." A ripple of confusion and speculation went through the cabin. This kind of announcement was rare. It usually meant one of two things: a medical emergency or, more often, law enforcement was waiting. In seat 3A, Chad's eyes lit up with malicious glee. He turned to Tiffany, his voice a gleeful whisper. "I knew it. The guy must be a criminal. A deportee, maybe. They're probably sending him right back where he came from. Oh, this is perfect. I called it from the start." Tiffany gasped, covering her mouth. "Oh my God, Chad, you think he's being arrested?" "What else could it be?" Chad said, practically buzzing with excitement. "They don't send a personal escort for people in economy unless they're in handcuffs. This is better than any movie." He craned his neck, trying to get a look back towards row 34, eager to witness the humiliation he felt was so richly deserved. Other passengers were murmuring, stealing glances at the man in 34B. Jonathan, for his part, showed no reaction at all. He simply continued to look out the window as the sprawling architecture of Terminal 5 came into view. The young developer, Kevin, sitting next to him, leaned over cautiously. Mr. Paul, are you okay?" he whispered. Jonathan turned his head and gave Kevin a reassuring smile. "Perfectly fine, son. Thank you for asking." His calmness was almost unnerving. It was the calmness of a man who was not a subject of the circumstances, but the author of them. He wasn't worried about who was coming to meet him, because he had arranged the meeting himself. The plane finally docked at the gate with a soft bump. The engine spooled down into a gentle whine, and then silence. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged off. Immediately the passengers in business and first class stood up, a frantic rustle of expensive fabrics and the clicking of overhead bins. Chad was one of the first on his feet, positioning himself in the aisle so he would have a perfect, unobstructed view of the walk of shame he was so eagerly anticipating. "Get your phone ready, Tiff," he muttered. "You might want to record this for posterity." The ground crew connected the jet bridge, and with a hydraulic hiss, the main cabin door was opened. The passengers in the front began to file out, but the expected police officers or stern-faced immigration agents did not board. Instead, a man in a flawlessly tailored Savile Row suit stepped onto the aircraft, his expression a mask of grave seriousness. He was flanked by 2 senior airport officials and the head of Aura Airlines UK operations. The man leading them was James Harrison, the chief executive officer of Aura Airlines, one of the most powerful figures in the aviation industry. He ignored the departing business-class passengers entirely. His eyes scanned the cabin until they found their target. He began walking down the aisle, his expensive leather shoes making determined sounds on the cabin floor, moving past the premium sections and crossing the curtain into the economy cabin. He was heading directly for row 34. Chad stood frozen in the aisle, his carry-on in hand, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. This was not what he expected. This was not the script he had written in his head. The CEO himself? Going into economy? It made no sense. His triumphant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of deep, profound confusion. The air in the cabin was thick with suspense. The show was about to begin, but the star was not who anyone thought it would be. James Harrison, a man whose presence usually graced boardrooms and international aviation summits, moved through the economy cabin with a purpose that silenced the rustling and murmuring around him. The remaining passengers, instinctively recognizing a person of immense authority, pressed themselves back into their seats, craning their necks to see. Chad Covington remained standing in the aisle of the business-class cabin, mouth slightly agape. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. Why was the CEO of the airline, a man featured on the cover of Forbes and the Financial Times, walking into the cheap seats? Harrison stopped at row 34. He looked past the young developer in the aisle seat, and his eyes met Jonathan Paul's. The look on the CEO's face was not one of anger or accusation. It was a look of profound, almost reverential respect, mixed with a deep, visible anxiety. "Jonathan," Harrison said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of his position. "Welcome to London. I came as soon as I got your email. I am so sorry for any inconsistencies you may have experienced on your journey." Jonathan slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and stood up. He was a few inches shorter than the CEO, but seemed to fill the space with an unshakable gravitas. "James," Jonathan replied, his tone even. "Thank you for coming. I thought it best we speak face to face." The young developer, Kevin, quickly scrambled out of his seat to let Jonathan pass, looking between the 2 men with wide, star-struck eyes. As Jonathan stepped into the aisle, Harrison gestured for his entourage to give them space. It was at this moment that Chad, still blocking the front aisle, found his voice. It came out as an incredulous squeak. "James? As in James Harrison?" Harrison's head snapped around. His eyes, which had been full of deference for Jonathan, turned to ice as they landed on Chad. "Excuse me, sir. You're blocking the aisle. We need to deplane a passenger." "But what's going on?" Chad stammered, gesturing vaguely between the CEO and Jonathan. Who is he?" James Harrison's gaze hardened. He had received a full, detailed report from the flight's lead attendant, Sarah, including the name of the passenger causing the disturbance. He knew exactly who Chad was. "This," Harrison said, his voice dropping, taking on a dangerous edge, "is Mr. Jonathan Paul, and you should choose your next words very, very carefully." A slow, dawning horror began to creep across Chad's face, but his arrogance was a hard habit to break. "Paul, I don't..." I've never heard of him. Does he work for the airline?" Harrison let out a short, incredulous laugh that had no humor in it. "Work for the airline?" "Sir, in a way, we all work for him." He turned back to Jonathan, his voice returning to its respectful tone. "Jonathan, I have the car waiting on the tarmac. We can bypass customs and be in the city within the hour to discuss this properly." "First," Jonathan said, his voice calm but firm, "let's clear the air right here. There seems to be some confusion." He turned his gaze, for the first time with real weight, directly onto Chad Covington. The casual observer was gone, replaced by a titan of industry. "Mr. Covington, is it?" Jonathan began. "You've spent the last 8 hours making assumptions based on my seat number and the color of my skin. You assumed my worth. You assumed my place in the world. You seem to value status above all else. So let me introduce myself in terms you might understand." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the recycled air of the cabin. "My name is Jonathan Paul. I am the founder and chairman of Paul Capital, a private equity firm with over $90 billion in managed assets. One of our largest portfolios is in transportation and infrastructure." He took a step closer, his eyes locking with Chad's. The smirk was long gone from Chad's face, replaced by a pale, sickly pallor. "Paul Capital," Jonathan continued, his voice echoing in the now dead silent cabin, "is the lead anchor investor in Aura Airlines. We led the buyout that took this company private 5 years ago. We financed the acquisition of the first 20 Boeing 787s that modernized this fleet. And the email I sent from this very seat, seat 34B, was the final approval for the Series E financing round. It was a $1.2 billion wire transfer to fund the purchase of 30 more of these beautiful Airbus A350s. He gestured around the cabin. "So to be clear, I wasn't just sitting on this plane. I was conducting a final, anonymous product inspection of the asset my company is about to double down on. I don't just fly on Aura Airlines, Mr. Covington. In a very real sense, I own it." The collective gasp from the remaining passengers was audible. Tiffany looked like she had seen a ghost, her face ashen. Chad's expensive suit suddenly seemed to be strangling him. His entire world, the carefully constructed hierarchy that placed him at the top, had just been vaporized. The man he had mocked as a charity case, a piece of riffraff, was effectively his landlord at 30,000 feet. Jonathan looked from Chad's horrified face to Sarah, the flight attendant, who was watching from the galley. "Sarah," Jonathan said warmly, "your professionalism under unpleasant circumstances was exemplary. James, I want to make sure she is formally commended. People like her are the true assets of this airline." Sarah's eyes filled with tears of shock and gratitude. Finally, Jonathan turned back to Chad one last time. He wasn't angry. He wasn't gloating. He looked disappointed. "A man's character," Jonathan said softly, "is not defined by the seat he pays for, but by how he treats the person in the seat next to him. You failed that test, spectacularly." With that, he turned and walked with James Harrison toward the open door, leaving Chad Covington standing alone in the aisle, a monument to his own shattered arrogance in the deafening silence of 100 staring eyes. The jet bridge felt like a gallows ramp. As Chad Covington stepped off the aircraft and into the sterile, impersonal corridor of Heathrow's Terminal 5, the atmosphere of humiliation followed him like a physical shroud. He was acutely aware of the passengers from economy streaming past him, their faces a mixture of pity, contempt, and morbid curiosity. The whispers were the worst part. Hushed but sharp, they cut through the ambient noise of the airport. "That's him, the one from business class. Can you imagine? Berating the man who owns the whole airline. Serves him right. Absolute git. Each comment was a fresh stab at his already hemorrhaging pride. He tried to straighten his Tom Ford suit, to puff out his chest, and project the aura of untouchable success that had been his armor for so long. But the armor had been pierced. It was no longer a symbol of his power, but a ridiculous costume from a play that had ended in disaster. His smirk, once a permanent fixture, was gone, replaced by a tight, bloodless line. Tiffany trailed a few paces behind, a deliberate, calculated distance. Her usual effervescent chatter was gone, replaced by a stony silence. She held her phone up, pretending to be engrossed in a text. But Chad knew it was a shield, a way to publicly disassociate herself from the social contagion he had suddenly become. The invisible thread that connected them, woven from prestige and mutual benefit, was fraying with every step. "Walk faster," he hissed over his shoulder, his voice a low, desperate rasp. "Why? So we can get to our public execution sooner," she retorted, her voice dripping with ice. The warmth and admiration she'd shown him hours ago had evaporated, revealing the cold, transactional core of their relationship. "This isn't my fault," he muttered, more to himself than to her. It was a reflexive lie, the first line of defense for a man whose ego could not process the totality of his failure. "Not your fault?" Tiffany let out a short, bitter laugh that turned heads. "Chad, you spent 10 minutes bullying a man because he was flying economy. You practically held a seminar on your own bigotry. Who exactly's fault is it?" "His?" They reached the sprawling immigration hall, a cavernous space filled with the tired energy of thousands of travelers. The long, winding queues seemed to mock him, forcing him to stand still and stew in his disgrace. He felt hundreds of eyes on him, though in reality, most people were oblivious. His paranoia was a prison of his own making. It was then that his phone, nestled in his suit pocket, began to vibrate. It wasn't a single buzz. It was a frantic, insistent series of pulses, one after another, like a desperate Morse code signal. He ignored it, his hand too clammy, his mind too scattered to deal with anything else. But it didn't stop. It buzzed again, then again, a relentless demand for his attention. With a sense of profound dread, he pulled it out. The screen was a nightmare in pixels. 4 missed calls from Michael Peterson, the formidable CEO of Innovate Solutions, and a string of text messages, each more alarming than the last. From Michael Peterson, Chad. Call me immediately. From Michael Peterson, I'm not asking. Pick up the phone. From Michael Peterson. What the hell did you do on that flight? From Michael Peterson. Your face is all over an internal Aura Airlines incident report that just landed on my desk. You have 60 seconds to call me before I make a decision without you. Chad's blood turned to ice water. An internal incident report? How was that even possible? The plane had barely been on the ground for 20 minutes. The speed of his downfall was dizzying, a free fall he couldn't stop. He looked at Tiffany, his eyes pleading. She just stared back, her expression unreadable and cold. He was on his own. Finding a sliver of privacy near a pillar, away from the main queue, he took a shaky breath and dialed his boss. Peterson answered before the first ring had even finished. There was no greeting, no preamble, just a roar of pure, unadulterated fury that was so loud, Chad had to pull the phone away from his ear. "Covington, are you a complete and utter imbecile?" "Michael, listen, I can explain," Chad began, his voice weak and reedy. "There was a difficult passenger, a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Peterson's voice crackled with a terrifying, incredulous rage. "You call systematically harassing a client, the single most important client in the history of this company, A misunderstanding. Do you have any idea, any concept at all of the damage you have just done? Chad's mind reeled. Client? What client? He was just some old guy in the back of the plane. Some old guy? Peterson's laugh was a horrifying, mirthless bark. Chad, let me paint you a picture, because you are clearly too dense to see it yourself. For the last 6 months, my entire executive team and I have been in a corporate war room. We have worked 18-hour days, weekends, holidays. We have poured millions into a proposal codenamed Project Nightingale. It's an enterprise-wide, exclusive software integration deal that would have redefined our company, doubled our market cap, and secured our position as an industry leader for the next decade. A cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of Chad's stomach. He had heard whispers of Project Nightingale, the top-secret deal that was supposed to be his boss's legacy. Our target, Peterson continued, his voice now dangerously low and controlled, was a notoriously private, unbelievably powerful private equity firm. A firm so influential they can make or break companies with a single phone call. We never even got in the same room as the chairman. We dealt with his VPs, his lieutenants, his gatekeepers. But the final decision, the signature on the $100 million contract, rested with one man. The world began to tilt. The ambient noise of the airport faded into a dull, distant roar. Chad knew, with the sickening certainty of a condemned man, what was coming next. The name of that firm, Chad, is Paul Capital. And the chairman, the man you decided to use as your personal punching bag for 8 hours, is Jonathan Paul. No, Chad whispered, the single word a pathetic puff of air. No, it can't be. It's a coincidence. There are no coincidences in this world, only consequences, Peterson bellowed, his rage returning full force. I just got off the phone with James Harrison, the CEO of Aura Airlines, an old friend from Wharton. He called me as a professional courtesy before his legal team buries us. He told me that his primary investor and financial backer, Jonathan Paul, was subjected to a tirade of racist and classist abuse by one of my senior sales executives. He gave me the flight number, the seat number, and your name. He faxed me the flight attendant's 4-page incident report. It's all here, Chad, in excruciating detail. Steerage, affirmative action. It's a career suicide note, and you signed your name to it. Chad slid down the pillar, his legs no longer able to support him. He was breathing in short, ragged gasps. The deal is dead, Peterson stated, his voice now devoid of all emotion, a flat, clinical death sentence. I received an email from Mr. Paul's chief of staff 10 minutes ago. It had one sentence. We do not partner with companies whose values are so fundamentally misaligned with our own. $100 million, Chad. 18 months of work by over 200 people. The future of this company, all of it, incinerated. Because your ego couldn't handle seeing a black man in an airport lounge. Michael, I'm sorry, Chad sobbed, the words tasting like ash. I swear I had no idea. And that is precisely the problem. It shouldn't matter if he was Jonathan Paul or a janitor. Your character is rotten to the core, and you let it poison my company. You are a liability. A walking, talking, reputational nuke. Peterson took a final, deep breath. Consider this your official termination for gross misconduct. Your corporate accounts are being frozen as we speak. Security is already boxing up your office. HR will courier your personal effects. Do not attempt to contact anyone at Innovate Solutions again. We are done. The line went dead. Chad sat there, phone clutched in his white-knuckled hand, the silence on the other end of the line more deafening than the shouting had been. Fired. Disgraced. The architect of his own, and potentially his company's, ruin. He looked up and met Tiffany's gaze. She had been standing nearby, had heard every word. The last vestiges of their alliance were gone. Her face was a mask of cold fury and calculation. She was already calculating the blast radius of his implosion and how to escape it. "You're a toxic asset, Chad," she said, her voice sharp and clinical. She might as well have been a trader cutting a losing position. "I can't be associated with this. With you." "Tiffany, wait," he pleaded, reaching out a hand. She took a step back, as if his touch might infect her. "I'm taking a separate cab to the hotel. I'll have my things moved to a new room. My assistant will be in touch about getting the rest of my stuff from your apartment." She didn't even say goodbye. She just turned, her roller bag clicking decisively on the marble floor, and melted into the crowd, leaving him behind without a second glance. Chad Covington was now utterly alone, a castaway marooned in the middle of Heathrow Airport. He had lost his job, his future, his partner, and his identity in the span of 30 minutes. He was nothing more than a man in a ridiculously expensive suit that suddenly felt 2 sizes too big, a hollow shell filled with the echoing consequences of a single, cruel laugh. The Windsor Suite at Heathrow is an oasis of profound silence, a world away from the frantic energy of the terminal below. Its walls are panelled in dark, polished wood. The air smells faintly of leather and fresh flowers, and through the panoramic, soundproof windows, the colossal ballet of jumbo jets on the tarmac plays out in serene quietude. It is a space designed for individuals who do not move through the world so much as the world rearranges itself around them. Inside this sanctuary, Jonathan Paul sat in a high-backed armchair, a simple cup of black coffee steaming on the mahogany table beside him. Opposite him, James Harrison, the CEO of Aura Airlines, looked as though he hadn't taken a proper breath since stepping onto the aircraft. His tie was slightly askew, and a sheen of perspiration glistened on his forehead, betraying the immense stress of the last hour. He had just ended a terse phone call with his legal team, and his face was a mask of grim apprehension. "The board is in an uproar," James began, his voice strained. "They've seen the preliminary incident report. They know who you are. They are preparing for impact. Jonathan, I want to begin by offering my deepest, most profound apology. What you experienced is inexcusable. It is a disgusting stain on this airline, and as CEO, I take full and absolute responsibility." Jonathan listened, his expression unreadable. He took a slow sip of his coffee before placing the cup back on its saucer with a soft, deliberate click. "James," he said, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the CEO's frantic energy. "Let's be clear. The first tranche of the Series E financing, all $1.2 billion of it, was wired and cleared 30 minutes ago. Paul Capital honors its commitments." The relief that flooded James Harrison's face was so profound it was almost painful to watch. His shoulders, which had been tensed up to his ears, slumped in an instant. He sagged back into his chair, running a hand over his face. "Jonathan, my God, thank you. Frankly, you would have been well within your rights to scuttle the entire deal. I would have understood." "And who would that have punished?" Jonathan countered, his gaze sharpening. "It would have jeopardized the jobs of 10,000 employees, pilots, mechanics, cabin crew, ground staff. It would have punished the shareholders who have entrusted us with their capital. It would have punished the very people who make this airline run, all because of the deplorable actions of one passenger and the corporate culture that implicitly permitted his behavior." He leaned forward, and the full weight of his presence filled the room. "My concern, James, is not with the money. It's with the asset itself. An airline is more than its fleet and its routes. That's just the hardware. The real value, the software, if you will, is its culture. And what I witnessed on Flight 88 was a bug in the system, a piece of cultural rot. The arrogance of that man, Covington, was a symptom of a disease that sees wealth as a license for cruelty and status as a shield from decency. That is the issue we need to discuss. James sat up straight, his relief now replaced by a focused intensity. He understood this was no longer about damage control. It was about a fundamental course correction, dictated by the most powerful man in his professional life. I'm listening. Tell me what needs to be done. First, let's talk about people, Jonathan began. Your lead flight attendant, Sarah. In the face of extreme provocation, she was a model of professionalism, de-escalation, and quiet dignity. She was the one who logged the detailed report that landed on your desk, an action that takes courage. She is the embodiment of the culture you should have. Therefore, I want her promoted. Not just a token raise, but a meaningful advancement. Create a new senior management position for her, Vice President of In-Flight Experience and Training. Her first task will be to personally oversee the design and implementation of a mandatory new training module for all staff, from the gate agent to the captain. We'll call it the Aura Standard. It will empower your employees to identify and shut down passenger-on-passenger harassment immediately and without fear of reprisal, regardless of which cabin the offender is sitting in. Give her department a blank check. James was already nodding, scribbling furiously on a notepad. Consider it done. An inspired choice. Second, Jonathan continued, his eyes drifting to the window where a plane was taking off, climbing powerfully into the sky. Perception becomes reality. Right now, the perception is that premium air travel is an exclusive club for the wealthy. We need to change that narrative. I want Aura Airlines to announce a major, long-term partnership with an organization like Aviation Youth, a non-profit that provides STEM education and flight training opportunities to underprivileged teenagers. I want to see kids from forgotten neighborhoods in the cockpit, in the engineering bays, and in the boardroom. My own foundation, the Paul Family Foundation, will personally match every dollar Aura commits to this program, up to $10 million a year for the next 10 years. He paused, a flicker of memory in his eyes. I was one of those kids once, James, staring at planes through a chain-link fence, thinking that world was not for me. We have a duty to tear down those fences. James looked up from his notes, his expression now one of genuine admiration. Jonathan, that's transformative. It's more than just good PR. It's a legacy. Finally, Jonathan said, his tone softening slightly. There was a young family on that flight, a mother with a crying baby, doing her absolute best while being subjected to the scorn of fools like Covington. I want you to find them. I want you to refund their tickets entirely. I want you to upgrade their entire family to first class for their return journey. And I want the airline to send them a voucher for an all-expenses-paid 2-week vacation to anywhere we fly. I want that mother to know that her dignity is valued more than the comfort of a bully. It is a small gesture, but its message is a powerful one. This airline stands with the decent, the compassionate, the human. James Harrison put his pen down. He looked at Jonathan not as a financier or an investor, but as a leader. He realized Jonathan wasn't just fixing a problem. He was articulating a new vision for the company, one based on respect and integrity. It was a vision far more inspiring than simply chasing profit margins. These are not demands, Jonathan, James said with a newfound conviction. "They are pillars for building a better airline. I will present them to the board not as a concession, but as a new strategic imperative. The Aura Standard. It will become our creed." "That's all I ask," Jonathan replied, a small, satisfied smile touching his lips. After James left, energized and with a renewed sense of purpose, Jonathan remained in the suite alone. The silence returned, deeper this time. He walked to the window, watching the ceaseless activity on the tarmac. He felt no sense of victory, no thrill of revenge. What he felt was a quiet, profound sense of order being restored. Chad Covington was a casualty of a war he had declared on himself. Men like him, who built their identities on the fragile scaffolding of money and status, were the poorest men of all. They possessed everything but a self. His phone buzzed softly on the table. It was a secure message from Eleanor, his chief of staff, a woman of formidable efficiency. "Mr. Paul, the wire is confirmed received by Aura. Innovate Solutions was informed of our decision to terminate the Project Nightingale evaluation. Their CEO, Michael Peterson, called to offer a profuse apology. We have since learned that Chad Covington's employment was terminated, effective immediately. Lastly, the family on Flight 88 has been located. The Petersons. No relation, thankfully. Mrs. Peterson was moved to tears when our representative contacted her. All has been arranged as you requested." Jonathan read the message and put the phone away. He hadn't needed to crush Chad Covington. He had simply stepped out of the way and allowed the man's own character to do the work. The universe, in its own inexorable way, always balanced its books. He looked out at the sky, at another one of his planes gracefully ascending, a silver dart connecting worlds, carrying thousands of lives, thousands of stories. He had ensured that from this day forward, the story of Aura Airlines would be a better one, and in the quiet hum of the powerful engines he could hear from half a world away, that was a return on investment that no spreadsheet could ever hope to capture. The story of Jonathan Paul and Chad Covington isn't just about a dramatic confrontation on an airplane. It's a powerful reminder that we never truly know the story of the person sitting next to us. A person's worth is not determined by their clothes, their seat assignment, or the color of their skin. It's measured in their character, their integrity, and their compassion. Chad Covington built his entire world on a fragile foundation of status and contempt, and it took just one flight for it all to come crashing down. He learned the hard way that the universe has a funny and sometimes brutal way of balancing the scales. True karma isn't about revenge. It's about receiving the direct and unavoidable consequences of your own actions. If this story of humility triumphing over arrogance resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more real-life stories of drama and justice. And we want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a moment of instant karma where someone got exactly what they deserved? Share your story in the comments below.